Woogaroo asked if I would do a piece on the difference between race trim and qualifying trim. Those are terms you hear thrown around a lot on television, but they don't always explain what they mean. Well, NASCAR is a little different than other racing series because in NASCAR you qualify by yourself on track. That means 2 laps, the best of those 2 laps counts. Well, that gives a crew chief the opportunity to do some things that he can't get away with during the race. One of the things that slows a car down is drag. Drag is the friction between the air molecules and the car. Now, the smoother the car is, the less drag. So what you'd like to do is take any bumpy parts on the car and make them as smooth as possible. Well, one of the biggest places where you get a lot of air resistance is here in the front grille. So what a crew chief would like to do would be to tape over that entire grille, covering up all the rough spots. Now, the problem is if you do that, the engine will probably blow up within a few laps because it'll get too hot. The grille is there because the engine needs it for cooling. So during a race, you have to make a compromise. You tape part of the grille. Well, during qualifying, you're only going to run 2 laps. So you'll see crew chiefs take their favorite tool, racer's tape, and tape over as much of the grille as they can possibly get away with. Another place that contributes to drag are the rear windows. And that's because they have these little ducts in them called NACA ducts. NACA is the acronym for the agency that came right before NASA. The reason those ducts are there is that a NACA duct is a really good way to get air to go into the car while creating minimal disturbance of the air going around the car. So it's a low drag way to get air into the car. That air is usually used for things like cooling the driver. Well, for 2 laps, the driver can stand to get a little bit warm. So you don't need the NACA ducts. So crew chiefs generally use a clear decal and they tape over the NACA duct so that there's no opening there and again, decreases the drag of the car for qualifying. You wouldn't be able to get away with that during the race. Every car has a side valence, and the side valence is there because you want to get the car close to the ground and keep air from getting underneath the car. Well, during a race, the car has to pit, and the crew has to be able to see where to put the jack. So all the side valences have this little cutout so that the crew can tell where the jack goes. Well, there's no pitting during qualifying, so you don't need to be able to access that jack. A lot of teams will actually change out the side valence and replace the valence with the notch in it with a solid side valence. More recently, I've seen some teams make inserts to go on the side of the car and cover up that gap. There are a lot of other little things you can do to decrease drag. Some drivers like having mirrors that poke a little bit outside the window so they can see better. Well, when you're qualifying, you're the only car on track, so you don't really need that. It goes. Again, decreases drag. At tracks where you're not required to run a right side window, which is mostly short tracks, some teams will put in the right side window because again, when the air rushes past the car window, it creates drag. So far, everything I've told you has been about the outside of the car, but there are things you can do on the inside. Anything that takes power from the engine but doesn't make the car go faster has to be shut off. So that means things like your bee blowers, your driver air conditioning. Again, it's only 2 laps, no harm done. You also want to think about the oil that you're going to use. Now, the purpose of oil in the engine is to lubricate moving parts. You've got a lot of metal moving around. You don't want the metal actually touching the metal. You want a thin film of oil in there. So you use something like maybe a 20-weight oil or a 10-weight oil. Now, these oils are sort of viscous, meaning a little gloppy at room temperature, but they need to be viscous at room temperature because oils get thinner when the heat increases. So when the engine gets to its working temperature, the oils are going to be getting very thin. Oils like these are still going to be thick enough to protect the engine. Now, you'll hear some teams tell you that at restrictor plate races, places like Daytona and Talladega, that they'll actually try using a 0-weight oil. A 0-weight oil has the viscosity of about water. Now, that may work for 2 laps, and the team may qualify really well. But if a team does that, I guarantee you, the first chance they have in the race, they're going to be back in the pits changing the oil, because there's no way the car can make an entire race on such lightweight oil and still have the engine running at the end of it. So there it is, the difference between race trim and qualifying trim. It really comes down to what you can get away with for 2 laps that you can't get away with for the whole race, because the whole point is to start up as close to the front as possible and hopefully stay there.